This conference will now be
Good
disconnected.
afternoon, welcome everybody.
Goodbye.
My name is Andy Holohan. I'd like to welcome you all to today's Blackboard webinar hosted by Times Higher Education. We'll get underway shortly. Firstly, I just wanted to share some quick housekeeping guide. On the webinar, we will have a chat facility for questions. Whilst this will actually be closed during the presentation, toward the end of the session, we will open this and allow you to post questions. We'll announce that at the appropriate time. We'll then queue these and answer those questions in turn. Also, during the webinar, we'll do a couple of brief polls. Simply use the raise hand option in the top left-hand side of your screen at the appropriate time, just to allow us just to get a little bit of feedback during the session. And it's worth noting that we will be recording today's session and plan to share that early next week, so you can review that at your leisure. So now let me hand over to Richard Burrows, Analytics Specialist here at Blackboard. He will take you through today's presentation. Thank you, and over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Andy. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Richard Burrows, and I'm Blackboard's Analytics Specialist for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And for the last 20 years, I've been involved in educational technology in the higher education sector. And for the last 3 years, I've been focused on the use of data and analytics in higher education. Today, I'll be joined by Andy Ramsden, a senior consultant with Blackboard, who for the last year has been working with higher education and further education institutions as they prepare for the adoption of learning analytics solutions. So in terms of what we'll be looking at today, we'll be looking at how analytics can be used to improve student success, focusing on how predictive analytics in particular can be used to better target student support and improve student outcomes. So putting a bit more detail to that agenda, first I want to look at the drivers for, behind the adoption of learning analytics in a local and international context, and then have a look at how Blackboard approaches learning analytics and our philosophy and our guiding principles on that. And then through client stories, I want to talk about the practical applications of both descriptive analytics and predictive analytics, and I'll explain what those are as we go along. So just to reiterate what Andy said, about 15 minutes before the end of the session, we'll open up the chat for you to post questions, and I've got a couple of points in the presentation today where I'm going to ask you for your feedback through the raise hand function. Obviously, at the end, we'll take time for question and answers. Okay, so looking at the context, it seems like in education every year we're asked to do more for less, yet we're also asked to provide better quality and improve learning experiences for all of our students. We have to accommodate ever-increasing numbers of students and increased access to education. All this is going on in an environment of certainly static funding, or in some geographies, reduced funding. And at the same time, we've got this drive for greater transparency for funders, for parents, for students, and particularly in the UK, we've got a move towards opening the market for greater competition. And at the same time, we've got this increased accountability, both for student outcomes and employability and employment. So we have this new these new pressures are really demanding smarter ways of working. And it's time really education took followed the lead of business and used data to better inform their decision making and improve the effectiveness of what we do. So recent developments in the UK reflect these international trends. The recent government white paper on higher education seeks to drive improvements in the quality of teaching through the introduction of greater transparency and also greater competition. And the white paper cites kind of motivations for this they cite an undercurrent of dissatisfaction, with up to 60% of students are dissatisfied with some element of their provision. They also cite the poor employability of students, with 20% of graduates in non-professional roles 3 years after graduation. And really the area that I'm going to focus on today is the differences in retention rates across the sector. I was surprised and slightly shocked by the type of language which the white paper uses, and this is paraphrased as a paragraph from that. These higher dropout rates represent thousands of life opportunities wasted. I don't think we could talk about it in more bold terms. So today's presentation is analytics for student success, and I think it's quite important that we go ahead and kind of define what we mean by student success. And really, it is defined by both the institution and the student. So for students, it's often about meeting their full potential, for passing their chosen courses and progressing through the institution in a timely manner without racking up unnecessary or additional debt. And for the institution, it's about retaining students. The Education Hire White Paper, and the TEF assessment methods will be looking for, will be measuring retention rates against benchmarks. So I want to ask you to use the raise hand function. I'm just looking for a show of hands to say, in how many people's institutions do they see an increased emphasis or awareness of the importance of student retention and success? So, interested to get your feedback. Just click on the raise hand, and then our moderator will clear the hands. Okay, through my console here, I can see it's very, very common across most institutions, which is good because this is what I'm going to be talking about for a lot of today's presentation. And of course, there's a little bit more to it than that, because student success within the institution helps ensure student satisfaction, and your students are the best ambassadors for what you do and help the reputation of the institution. Just to say what I can't speak about today is I really recognize that there are other measures of student success, the so-called graduate attributes, things such as academic excellence, critical thinking, effective communication, and things like having an international perspective. Those are incredibly important, but they're very difficult to measure, and so very difficult to start to influence. So, well, we can't tackle those today. I want to talk a little bit and set the scene by talking about our approach and philosophy to the use of data and analytics. Okay, so learning software has been our core competency for around the last 20 years, and we know what it takes to build reliable and easy-to-use software. Okay, and over about the last 5 years, we've been adding to that skills base through investments in both technology and people in the area of handling academic data and analytics. And part of that has been to build a team of world-leading experts in the area of learning analytics. And this all comes together to provide products and services that provide an insight into teaching, learning, and student success and student progression. However, though, our philosophy at Blackboard is that data should complement human decision-making. So we're not talking about automated systems. We're talking about putting the right information into the hands of the right people so that they can make informed decisions to help students on their learning journey. What we're not talking about is what one of my colleagues refers to as the computer teacher in the sky, which automates the system. So I want to introduce a concept of both predictive and descriptive analytics. This is a much plagiarized diagram adapted from a book called Competing on Analytics by Davenport and Harris from 2007. And in this book, they talk about different types of analytics. And we can see in the bottom left-hand corner, we have descriptive analytics. And descriptive analytics is about understanding what's happened. That might be what just happened, but effectively in the future. And so an example of that could be the retention center, which will provide alerts based on what's just happened, whether a student is engaged with the course or whether a student is performing within the course. It can also be analytics for Learn, Blackboard's business intelligence system for Blackboard Learn. And one of the things that the business intelligence system does, by having a data warehouse, it lets you look back and start to understand why it happened. So we call this diagnostic analytics. But once you have this collection of data, you can also start to think about, if I can understand and model student success, then I should also be able to start to understand the variables or features that will predict student success in the future. And if you can predict student success, or indeed students who may not succeed, then you're able to intervene early. Davenport and Harris also identify prescriptive analytics, and you might imagine that if you can predict and understand the features which make, for instance, for a successful course, then you can start to prescribe the shape and nature of course and the pedagogies. I just have to say, we're not at that point yet, and we're not even working on it. We're all about using predictive analytics to better inform student support. So there's been a lot of interest in industry about the use of analytics, and I think this is work by Nucleus Research from 2014, where they did a literature survey, and one of the key reasons is that analytics pays back $13. They found that analytics pays back $13 for every dollar spent. So business has been doing analytics and predictive analytics for quite a while, and it's a relatively new, a new topic for education, a new area for education. So just giving you a kind of picture of Blackboard's product portfolio. These are two products for Learn, and I'll focus mostly on these today, but I'm also going to introduce our product for Moodle. So if there's any Moodle users out there, I will also be talking about our predictive analytics solution for Moodle. So we have Blackboard Predict, which is a predictive analytics, an early alerts system focusing on retention and student success. And it will provide data for faculty or academics and advisors about students at risk. And its data sources include both the Student Information System and BB Learn. We also have Blackboard Analytics for Learn, which is a data warehouse and business intelligence solution, which supports performance and engagement monitoring, but also supports root cause analysis. So for instance, understanding which features of a course are leading to student engagement and student success. And again, the data sources there include the SIS and Learn, and as the diagram shows, it gives a historic and very nearly current view of student engagement and performance. So that was a bit of kind of analytics 101, and I want to bring it back to something much more pragmatic and much closer to home. So this is kind of a way that I started to think about how we can use data in education. And a lot of this is about, or I'm going to talk mostly today about identifying students in need of support, also known as students at risk. But data can also be used to inform course management. So effectively, which students to engage with, courses which are not running as well as they might, on a day-to-day basis. And we've got some examples of that. For instance, identifying under-engaged students within a course and reaching out to them, or underengaged or socially isolated students in a course, and reaching out to them or changing the work groups which they're part of, the groups that they're part of, so that they become more socially engaged. We can also use this data for improving course design. And you may have seen, and certainly in any follow-ups to this, we can share with you a recent research work by Blackboard, which has done an extensive study of literally millions of learner records, looking at those features of courses which are associated with student success. Really interesting work with some findings which you probably wouldn't expect, so I will share that after. Kind of intentionally grayed out is the fourth area, which is about improving institutional effectiveness. And this often boils down to things like looking at the effectiveness and the need for training in your institution. So today, I'm going to be focusing on this area of identifying students in need of support. So what are the data points which we use? Well, there's lots of good research calling out particular names like John Fritz at UNBC in the States, a work which we did with the California State University, and others which show a strong correlation between engagement and student success. So as we start to build a profile, we're interested in the levels of engagement that students have in the course, both in terms of activity and the amount of time which they spend there. Slightly unsurprisingly maybe, course grades. And when I talk about course grades, I'm talking about the types of grades which are recorded within Learn, or within the Grade Center in Learn or Moodle, but represent the grades coming from both summative assessment and formative assessment. And the benefit of these types of grades is that they are very real time. They show and illuminate student performance as it happens within the course, as opposed to final summative assessment, which of course often comes too late in order to act upon. The third area of data that we can use is demographic data and also historic academic performance data. I've lumped these two together because this data often comes from the student information system. The demographic data might include features such as financial hardship, underrepresented ethnic minorities, or first generation to attend university. It might also be things like late course enrollment. And of course, academic history may be the academic history from either within your institution, as students progress between years, or the academic history that they bring with them when they join the university. So we can use all of this data to start to understand the likelihood of students passing a course. So I want to next look at the use of descriptive analytics. It was analytics for Learn. To identify students in need of support. And I'm going to use a case study from Indian River State College in the US. It's a university, and back in 2013, it launched a virtual campus, a fully online campus. It currently offers 8 fully online degree programs and enrolls 15,000 students each year. And since its launch in 2013, it's seen very significant growth with an increase in student numbers of around 34%. However, it struggled to match its on-campus success rate. So the virtual campus struggled to match the on-campus success rate. And that's not unusual for virtual campuses. But what they did do was they set about addressing that. So one of the first things that they did was adopt a master course model. And this was a model for the creation of courses that was based upon empirical evidence for effective course design. And then they went about and developed prescriptive, what they call prescriptive faculty training, with an emphasis on online pedagogy and the use of analytics data. Interestingly, they required all faculty to use the Grade Center, And that recent work that we did, the top feature for successful students was the presence of the grade, or the strongest feature with a correlation for student success was students that used and checked the grade center. So they instructed their faculty members to use the grade center and also required them to record student performance at 4, 8, and 12 weeks. What they did was giving that real-time feedback about student performance. And then they provided reports to instructors, advisors, learning technologists, and academic management. And through doing that, they got the whole institutional body to come together to focus upon student success. They produce these student success reports, and these are used to identify bright spots of performance on the course and understand when a given technique, process, or activity was found to be associated with greater student engagement and student success. And so, working between faculty and instructional designers, they work together to understand, expand, and share these techniques and best practices with their colleagues. They also gave instructors information about student performance and engagement. It's interesting because when you speak to them, they were not necessarily interested in or focusing upon the under-engaged students, but what they were focusing on was that forgotten middle, those students who are working hard, but something is stopping them from achieving their goals, because that's a place which they think they can influence the best. This is a typical report. It shows a scatter plot of the students on the course, and by clicking on the link, you're taken to more detail about that particular student's academic history and their levels of engagement. They also provided the academic advisors with their view of exactly the same data, and that was included things like current grades from Learn. Remember, that was giving them real-time insight into how those students were doing, and also grade history from the SIS and levels of engagement. So they're getting a picture about what type of student that is and how best to help that student. So this is a sample of that type of report, and it not only shows the current levels of engagement and progress, but also historic data on the student. So, what were the outcomes? Well, they increased the course success rates by 7%, very closely matching, getting to a point where they very closely matched the on-campus success rates. And they did that, closed that attainment gap in just 3 semesters. But when you talk to them about what was important, it was about bringing the whole university team together to work on student success and enabling that through a common understanding and a common data set. So that was the real power of data. It was a common point of conversation for the whole academic body. So there I was talking about an example which used analytics for Learn, which is a descriptive analytics solution. And now I want to kind of change gears and look towards predictive analytics solutions. I'm going to go back one and just say, ask a question, a quick show of hands. So the question is, do you think that your institution is currently able to effectively identify students at risk or students that need additional support? So if you could use the raise hand function, I'd be interested to see the results. So the question was, can your institution, and I think I've only got one institution which is registering that they can effectively identify students at risk. Oh, it's gone up to, my assistants here are counting that it's now gone up to 2 out of a very large enrollment for this. So I think it's a common problem. We actually, at the moment, we don't know who those students at risk are. If we could clear the raised hands. Thank you. So that's the problem we're setting out to try to solve. And we're trying to do that not only in real time, but also to be able to predict those students who will be at risk. So when I started on this topic, I suppose about over a year ago, I thought this was all about reaching the right student, about identifying that student. But the more you think about it, effectively there's more to the problem than that. Because for most institutions, they simply don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to be able to support all students. So what predictive analytics allows you to do is to reach the right students at the right time. So you might have a student who joins the university with a stellar academic record, the A-star student, and you don't perceive that they're a risk at all when they start. But the example I use is that student then finds the union bar and their studies start to suffer, and they go from being no risk to high risk. But one way you can intervene. And equally, you might have a student who joins with a poor academic record or other risk characteristics, but excels in the university environment and leaves that risk behind. So it's often about identifying the right student at the right time, because that goes towards solving your capacity problem. You're only intervening where students, when students need help. It's also, taking the Indian River example, it's also about empowering both academic advisors, so that's lecturers or instructors acting as advisors, and professional advisors that may sit in somewhere like student services. Because by empowering academic advisors with that critical information about student risk, you actually increase your overall capacity, and it's often the first place that a student will go. Providing a shared view of the information also helps that conversation. It means that if an academic identifies a risk, they can identify that and pass that student on to professional advisors, but knowing that they will be able to see the same data about that student and understand the causes. So, and then the final point is about ease of adoption. Historically, a lot of these analytics solutions were separate systems requiring separate logons and those types of things, and it was difficult to use. So what we set out about doing was making that easy to use by putting that data into the hands of people where they use it on a day-to-day basis. So, for instance, within the course. So here's some examples of predictive analytics solution. This is X-ray learning analytics for Moodle. And X-ray learning analytics uses data from the course to identify both academic risk based on student performance and a social risk based on social isolation of the course, and also other demographic information to provide a total risk. And that total risk is predicated on a dichotomous question, a question, for instance, what is the probability of this student passing the course or failing the course? So here we see a student, the top student, Jonathan, with a high risk. So Jonathan is unlikely to pass the course. The diagram below is a frequency distribution, and that gives the instructor an understanding of the type of risk profile of students. And fortunately in this course, we see the vast majority of students are absolutely fine, but we also see that there are small populations of medium risk and small populations of high risk. And that gives the institution an idea about what the risk profile for a particular course looks like and how best to respond to it. So I'm going to change gear and I'm going to look at Blackboard Predict, which today is for Learn, but potentially will come to other systems. I'm going to have a look at how it works. So the first thing with predictive modeling is that you have to define the question. Okay? You're looking at highly processed data, answering a particular question, and that question has to be relevant and actionable. So last week I was in South Africa, and one of the government's key measures there is the what they call throughput, or time to graduation. And I asked, before I went, could we predict which students would graduate within 3 years? I asked my boss this, and he said, well, yes. And I thought, great, I'm going to go to South Africa and say we can predict that. But he said, what would you do with that data? The problem with that data is that you can't actually action it, because you don't know specifically enough where the problem lies. Equally, I've got a case study which I'm going to come up to, which is about short courses, where we were predicting the risk of a student not attending the course next week. So clearly, if your institution has 35,000 students, and you are measuring the risk that they might not attend next week, your support services are going to be absolutely overwhelmed. So you have to identify a suitable problem, a typical problem being, tell me which students on my course will not achieve a C grade or higher. So once you've defined your problem, you look to ingest that data. Okay, so that's data coming from the student record system, the student coming from Learn, and you use that collection of data to build a model. And that's a statistical model which goes about identifying the variables or features that are strongly correlated with student success, or the question which you're asking. So once you've built that model, you can then test that model with new data. And so what you do is you give that model data, information about a student that it's never seen before, but you know the answer about, and says, will it accurately predict the outcome for that student? So once you've built this model and you're supplying it with this new student data, what you do is you get results from that exercise, and you're able to distribute that as reports to either to advisors, to students, or to the instructors on the course. So we spoke about the different types of data. And what you tend to find is, in some cases, is that the weights of the relevant weighting of that data changes over a period of time. At the start of the course, or indeed in the first academic year, a lot of that information is historic. So the grades which the high school grades that the student brings to the course, or indeed their average grade point average from previous academic years or in their current year, things like the historic pass rate. Historic data which gives you that initial risk for the student, and will that help you to identify those students at risk early on and the ones that will need support. But as the course progresses, you find that the model changes, and it becomes much more about their levels of engagement and their academic performance. And so you're able to modify those risk ratings as the course progresses. And then we spoke about distributing that information, putting that information into the hands of the people who can act. So it might be about putting the information back into the course so that the course instructor and students can see how they're doing in that course and what their risk might be. Be cautious about giving this to students. It might be about giving it to advisors through their own portal, or integrating it with a student support system or CRM system. So I thought you might be interested to see a little bit about what this looks like. So here's some examples. This is the faculty's dashboard. This is the report which is available to a student, available to the instructor on the course, and it gives a clear indication of the number of students on the course which are perceived to be at high risk, medium risk, and low risk, but also gives you a drill down on the individual students. So here we have Mary Peak, and she's what we call an alert student because her risk has changed. As you can see, she started with a low risk. Her probability of passing the course was good. But over a period of the course, what we see is that the probability of her passing the course is decreasing and decreasing. So what you can also do is you can drill down a little and see just enough information to give you an understanding of why we think that student is at risk. And what we can see here is that poor old Mary did slightly underperform the class average in terms of the first 2 assignments, but she did fine on the third. But down the bottom, we can also see her levels of engagement in the course. And what we see is that while she was initially quite well engaged, the load on the course, the expected or average course load increased, while Mary's engagement in the course critically decreased. And that's why we think Mary's at risk. It's also the sign of a student that might well be easily saved, because it looks like Mary might be having a crisis of confidence in this course. But when you look at how she performed compared to her peers, she wasn't doing at all badly until she decided to check out. So what will the instructor do? Well, either the instructor can speak directly to Mary the next time he sees her, or he can pass that concern on to the professional advisor. And this model assumes that Mary has an assigned advisor, Paul Temple, and he can simply send a message to her. And so when the advisor sees that, that data might appear in their dashboard. And this gives a list of all the students which they're responsible for. They could also do a lookup, or they can do filtering, and gives you some critical information about that student, things like, and it's all configurable for your institution, but things like the entry points that they joined the course or the university with, the type of degree program they're on, the idea of a course load, and those types of things. And it gives an overall probability or an average of that student's likelihood of success. And it also gives a course-by-course indication about where that risk lies. So for June Alexander at the top, we can see that she has 2 courses where we are very concerned, and 1 course with a medium level of concern, and English she seems to be doing well at. It also gives tiny on this screen, but also gives an indication of kind of whether we think that is getting better or worse. So we often talk about this forgotten middle, students that maybe have the potential to do well, but for one reason or another are at risk. And one of the features which this brings, what we've brought in with Blackboard Predict, is actually monitoring the change. So we can identify the risk trend. Is the risk trend decreasing or increasing? So obviously we might want to filter on students where their risk is increasing, going from no risk at all to a medium risk, for instance. And that will help us address that kind of forgotten middle and optimize the success rates across the institution. We also provide a student dashboard. Now this data is available to the instructor, and personally I would be cautious about providing this information to students unmediated, and by that I mean introduced in a constructive conversation, because we're also able to predict how the student is likely to do in the course overall. So if they do no more work, what would be effectively the minimum outcome? If they continue to work as they are working, what will be their likely grade at the end of it, and also the maximum possible grade if they achieve everything that's left to achieve in the course. And clearly, this is great for a student like this, which is on track to do very well. But I think if that is a student is on track to fail, then that needs to be very much a mediated conversation, because it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So probably the question which you're asking by now is, how accurate are these predictions? And the answer is remarkably. Let me talk about a case study. So one of our clients asked us to help them identify the attrition risk on a fully online course. Okay? It was a short course, only 7 weeks long, so it required rapid interventions. And historically, there was a strong correlation between poor attendance in the online course and poor attendance in the online course and attrition. And so what we did was, the question which we wanted the answer to was, what's the probability that the student would attend on 4 out of the 7 days in a week? Because knowing that information, we could start to identify very quickly the students where we needed to reach out to them. So we developed a predictive model. We took the data from 1,456 distinct courses that ran between January 2013 and August 2014, with an average class size of 23 and 19,500 distinct students. And we use that data to, first of all, to train a predictive analytics model, then to validate that model, and then to test it. So at the end of this, we're giving that model which identifies the features or variables which are important and attributes a weighting to those. And in the final phase, we test that by giving that model data that it's never seen before, but we know the outcome on, and look to see whether we're accurately predicting the outcomes. And what we found, in rather similar to the previous example, but a slightly different data set, was that one model didn't accurately describe the situation. We actually needed two. We could have done a weekly model, but that becomes quite difficult to manage and maintain. So what we came up with was two models, a week 0 to 1 model, which was predicated on much more on historic data, and then a week 2 to 6 model, which was much more about current data. So things like the current class cumulative grade performance in terms of grades, attendance in the previous week, those types of features in the weekly model, which followed that week 0 model. And overall, we were extremely accurate when this went out into production. We were extremely accurate. We achieved what is called an F1 score, which is a measure of two different types of accuracy, of 84% and for the week 0 model, and 85% for the following weekly model. And just to say, that overall score is made up of two features, which are called precision and recall. I need to read these out. So, of the students we predicted would attend class that week, what percentage actually attended, and it was between 80 and 84%. And recall, of the students that did attend class that week, what percentage did we accurately predict, and that was between 89 and 84%. And when I saw these results, I actually went back to the literature and said, okay, so in a blended model, what kind of accuracy would we expect to achieve? And even in a blended model, we expect to achieve between 70 and 80% in that F1 score. So this changes this starts to change the situation, because now it's all about, if you knew, what would you do? So if I was to give you a list of 100 students that were perceived to be at risk, what would you do with that information? And this is where it transitions from the risk modeling to the interventions. But we can do that now with quite high levels of accuracy. And so it changes the situation about how the institution responds. And we can help with that, and maybe that will be a feature of a further presentation. But at the moment, I just wanted to introduce this idea of predictive modeling and the types of use that can be made of it and the kinds of accuracy which can be achieved. So now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Andy Ramsden, who's going to talk a little bit about the work that he's been doing in terms of assessing institutions' readiness and what you would need to put in place to start to leverage this type of information. So, Andy, are you there?
I am, Richard. Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Good. Yeah,
Great.
I can hear you perfectly.
Brilliant. Well, we'll take that then, that everybody can hear me. Thank you very much, Richard, and hello, everyone. As Richard says, I'm going to try and build on the story that's emerging from the session, but try to look at it from more of a institutional readiness dimension. So there's this wonderful work going on with developments of tools, developments of effective intervention strategies, the emergence of the predictive elements, and how that's coming through from the course levels, program levels, and modules. This piece of work, though, which we're going to feed back on, is looking at it through the lens of, is the institution ready? To what extent is the institution ready to embark on a learning analytics service as a cross-institutional piece. And the evidence I'm going to talk about and some of the emerging stories draws from our work as part of the JISC initiative in the UK, which they've got a 3-year program looking at learner analytics, and Blackboard as part of that were commissioned to undertake 15 institutional readiness assessments. So these are 3-day on-site engagements where we use very standardized methodology around looking or assessing how ready an institution is to take advantage of learning analytics now, or would it be looking at a large-scale pilot, 40% of its, say, its student cohort, or should it be looking currently at small-scale pilots to build up momentum, consensus, and understanding? And we look at those through a framework, as I say, that covers things such as culture, processes, people, and technology. Now, I've just put up the outcomes here to give a sense of some of the emerging ideas and lessons and observations. So this is 12 of the institutions, one of which was a large FE. The 11 HEs were covered research intensive to teacher intensive, covered large 30,000 students to small 5,000 students. And there's many stories within the data, and I'll try not to get too exciting and enthused by it, but something I think that is really interesting is looking at this identifies where we would put them or where they, in terms of their reports, where they sat, were they ready now for institutional-wide deployment, were they ready but with recommendations? So there were some tweaks they needed to make, or some thoughts they needed to improve on, or were they not ready with another set of recommendations? And when we just do a really simple analysis of those 4 what we call pillars and the degree of readiness, it's that gap which is quite interesting, which appears around processes and people. So for this particular group, and I think this resonates when you listen to and talk with other institutions and with the research that's coming out generally across on the global perspective, there's, in terms of institutions' readiness to take advantage of all this wonderful stuff that's coming through, we're seeing within their processes and their people that they need to make some significant work. So what we mean by processes really is looking at aspects along, well, how ready or how is policy derived and how are procedures implemented consistently across the institution, because we know by definition to take advantage of these things you need to make sure the data is there, it's actionable, its data is clean and where it fits into the systems. So in terms of processes, there's a question mark. So if you were thinking about doing a self-assessment or working yourselves out on that sort of that positioning, really focusing around how are we consistently deploying our processes to ensure good data quality, and the one that we normally come up against is the ones around things such as e-feedback, e-submission, e-feedback policies, or looking at ideas around attendance. Many institutions are very good at developing attendance policies, but they're not so good at implementing them and monitoring them and evaluating them and ensuring that the institution starts to consistently collect that data and put it into the systems that we draw upon. The other thing that comes through very clearly in terms of are we ready within this group of institutions is the people aspect. And what we take is the view of, well, let's have a use case, and the institution helps develop that before it. So, for instance, around student success, a very popular one is student attainment. What can we do, or how can we help a 2-2 student and nudge them towards a 2-1? So how could that work there? And then we take the whole of that use case and we unpack it from the intervention aspect of the personal tutor or the support mechanisms, the support teams, their information literacies, all the way back through to the IT people and the reporting nature there, the data analysts, and also the initial set of people that were generating the content or data that you draw upon. So something that comes through, a message there that we've been clearly coming through from the group is currently they're tending to work, they have areas of expertise, but they're not being joined up or they're not being coordinated in a collaborative method that would able to generate and deliver these use cases. So there's a lot of capacity constraints as teams become leaner, and the realization that learning analytics is the use of many different people and roles and responsibilities within the delivery of that use case. As I said already, there's personal tutors, there's lecturers, there's data analysts, and of course there's students, and there's student support. So that's something that comes through there. The other message that we constantly challenge or hear from institutions and challenge them is the view of, well, who owns learning analytics within their institution, and ensuring that there's an understanding that in fact learning analytics, because of its cross-institutional nature, is not a technical project, which many institutions sort of initially think or view it as. Is not actually a technical project, is much more a change management process. And all of those out there that are listening who've got soft spots for Kotter's change management model, etc., will see that it clearly sits within these steps here that we use as part of our analysis with them, and a sense of how they would onboard an institutional program. So this works in very clearly around, well, is there a vision? Where is the leadership for this? Where is the level of engagement? Where is the coalition of people that's going to enable this to happen, to help inform, are you ready or are you not ready for learning analytics? And what level of piloting you initially be thinking about? So within the assessments, we tend to go up to the third step, which is designing the pilots around quick wins, and we use that as part of the delivery mechanism there. So a key message here really is viewing it as a cross-institutional endeavour. It needs to be the coalition built. There needs to be building on your current knowledge and expertise within your institutions, and then how you can scale that rapidly across the institution. And this comes back, again, key messages which you'd expect as you're developing your pilots, to sort of, with hindsight, to those sort of common sense points. Firstly, we constantly try to find alignment between what the people, in terms of the student success, how does that actually align with the strategic objectives, and how does that align with the prioritization process within the institution? Again, the realization, it is a large, significant endeavor which will take a number of years to deploy and will have significant change. So it needs to be very much aligned to what the institution is trying to achieve and set within its prioritization processes. The other thing that is always a pleasure when we do these, and is, in fact, there is so much good practice going on within universities and within FE colleges, it's just not surfaced very well to the people that need to know it, and to the wider community within that institution. So something that we see both from the, as Richard mentioned, from the sort of enhanced reporting aspect, the dashboards, what has happened, or even into the predictive part, they're taking maybe two, three data sources from their own, their VLE or SIS data points, and starting to develop their own algorithms and predictive elements. There's a lot of this going on, incredible amount of it going on, and some really rich stories that need to be shared within the institution. So the key point here when you're thinking through is to just take that step back and do a really thorough review of what is actually going on in your institution. And you'll be hopefully pleasantly surprised as more and more people start to say, yeah, I use the retention centre. I use the retention centre this way, and this is my intervention strategy. Or another institution says, oh, we do as they come into the institution, they do a numeracy and literacy assessment, which is undertaken by this group, and then that data feeds in to this particular tool, be it your SIS or whatever, and therefore we can start to build up cohort analysis for widening participation, or for foundation degree students that are coming in, and then moving into level 4. So there's so much going on that people are not aware of, that you need to really work hard to flesh out and surface. This is probably as I say, you'd imagine is one of the key ones about why most institutions, the outcome of these assessments is we tend to recommend, given the issues around process, and processes and procedures, and the inconsistencies in the data that's been generated, and the inconsistencies in people's interpretations, and the inconsistencies in people's use of those systems. We tend very much to look around building up sets of small-scale pilots, to build up awareness, and this is really the area that we tend to focus most on, because lots of people are very interested in drawing, as you'd imagine, data from your VLE. So, and the example you had of in your river, where they were putting in some form of engagements in weeks 4, 8 and 12, gives you a sense of the change required and those digital literacies that you'll need to make sure are in place for your staff, as well as your students on interpretation. So looking at your data quality, starting to map through some of those data flows of how it will work, who does what, where the roles and responsibilities are, and how that can be rolled out across a number of departments or schools or faculties is crucial, and tends to be the focus of your first initial pilots. The other thing in this sense, is starting to understand where we are. This is very, very new for lots of people. Now, learning analytics is definitely in its infancy. You can see the emergence of much better tools. You can see the emergence of more research and evidence coming out about, well, what do we mean by engagement? And Richard mentioned those graduate skills and graduate attributes at the start of this session. So as this is an evolving space, and there are many perceptions around, you've got to build the coalition around your academics and your students, would be one of the key messages we put in. Many times we listen about how the sense of this being driven from top down as they're moving from institutional business analytics into the actual learning component around looking for curriculum enhancements or student success, etc. And then there's that gap. So this is just some quotes from a recent report where we ask academics what are their perceptions, and you get those emerging patterns that you expect, and we've encountered across all 15 institutions about uncertainty about their role as an academic or as a personal tutor, concerns on workload, concerns about the trust of the data, concerns about are students ready, how will students be prepared for this, how are people intervening and making interventions based on it, and how will it fit in terms of the wider institutional investments and priorities. Now, you're only going to be able to start to address those questions, of course, by putting that academic and those academic and students at the centre of the conversation. So then a lot of the outcomes from these assessments is the need, or at the moment the need, that we are not engaging certain stakeholder groups, particularly the academics, and there's a slight mismatch in their understanding of the opportunities and also the negative assumptions, associations with learning analytics. So there's definitely a need to bring those in. And that feeds into my last slide, which is the idea here of which I always use the example of, if I having implemented various learning VLEs or implemented e-portfolio systems within your institutions, you can implement those incredibly effectively with a relatively small proportion of the institution being interfaced or engaged or impacted by it. And of course, learning analytics is not that situation. You can imagine with attendance registering, you go from you've got issues around estates, rooms, and all sorts of aspects, all the way through to the IT, all the way into timetabling, etc. So something, again, we clearly put within it, and are probably looking at the moment within institutions, within their case studies, etc., is this really a partnership they're working on? Are they working in on a very small base of the pyramid? Would strongly encourage, and the message coming through from the assessments is strongly encouraging a number of partnerships. Firstly, your internal partnership about making sure your various groupings actually not just cooperate but collaborate effectively around the use cases that you're implementing and working on. And then secondly, on top of that, you've got that external partnership view as well. You've got rich successes with Blackboard in this space, working with its institutions and its partners, and there's that tapping into that group and into the wider groups and the communities of practice.
Thank you, Andy. It's really interesting to hear about the things that institutions should consider as they assess their readiness for the adoption of learning analytics. It's really thought-provoking stuff. And I really wonder if we should arrange a follow-up session to look at this in more detail. I thought it might be useful to sum up the session today and also to let you know where you can find more information about Blackboard's learning analytics solutions. So over the last hour, I've introduced the major work streams that learning analytics can support, and I've introduced the concept of both descriptive analytics and predictive analytics. We spoke about the external pressures on your institutions that are driving your institutions to become more accountable for student success. I gave examples of how one institution is using descriptive data about performance and engagement as a catalyst for driving effective interventions that led to significant improvements in student success. I then went on to talk about how we could use data and analytics not only to identify students as they start to struggle, but also to predict which students will struggle in the future. And I looked at in detail at a new solution from Blackboard, Blackboard Predict. And then, as you know, we finished off the session by discussing the types of things that institutions need to consider as they look to make better use of data to drive student success. For further information, please feel free to contact me directly. My details are on the screen in front of you, or visit our website at www.blackboard.com/analytics. I hope that you found today's session useful, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the near future. Thank you very much.